Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Yeah, my way into Luang Por Chah's profound teaching was one that, again, it came right abrupt in one situation when I was in the monastery in northeast Thailand, where Luang Por Sumedho spoke about, Wat Panana Chat. At the time I left Germany for want of a place to develop my practice in meditation. From the moment I decided to actually go to this monastery, it was almost like going on a slide. It's like you sit on a slide and everything just goes automatic. Everything seemed to be somehow pointing towards Wat Panana Chat whenever I traveled for the few weeks before I decided to finally make my way to the northeast. Everybody was talking about Wat Panana Chat, saying, you should really go there, this is the place. And so when I walked into this forest, and every time I go back to Nana Chat, this is the memory I retain. It's just walking into this forest. The tree is a sort of arching as you walk into the forest, and everything is all of a sudden cool, and you walk into this almost like an alley, but it's like covered in these trees, and the sound of the cicada, sound of the animals, and it was just such a wonderful feeling. The very first time I walked in there, I really felt at home. It was kind of like a coming home kind of feeling. And I'd never really been a Buddhist before. I just went there on recommendation of someone. But somehow that was the place I was meant to go. And just seeing the monks going about their chores, sweeping, doing simple things quietly, mindfully. It was a time that it stopped me. Every time I looked around me, I felt I had to stop him. I was stopping in my tracks, just seeing, looking, trying to observe. The encouragement in this monastery was meant to be for you to look, to see, to observe, to use every little facet of simple things during everyday life, to incorporate that into your attempt to be mindful, to practice, to be alert, to know, to learn about your own mind. Because after all, this is the teaching that stands out for me of Luang Por Chah. He was always pointing you back to your own mind. And for those of you who looked at the exhibition outside, very tastefully, beautifully done, I found it really moving, just looking through it and reading the little bits and pieces, many of which, of course, I had read many times before. But for those of you who noticed the different pictures of Luang Por Chah, the different faces, it was... Luang Por Chah had absolutely no paramita when it came to paintings. I don't think I know one single painting of Luang Por Chah that is actually really beautiful. Maybe I'd be happy to be corrected, but from my memory, I've never seen any painting of Luang Por Chah that I really enjoyed, except maybe for one. I'm just reminded of one. But photography, he seemed to just have a face to be photographed. It's like there's so many beautiful pictures. If you look at the the biography of Luang Por Chah, there seem to be so many different faces of Luang Por Chah, and that's precisely what sort of touched me, or what I like about Luang Por Chah, because Luang Por Chah was not the same for everybody. As many people have said, joking or half joking, to each their own Achaan Chah. Because depending on where you stood in your own practice, depending where you came from, your background, your skills in meditation, your ability to develop wisdom, Luang Por Chah would always pick up on that, and then he'd become the teacher that he needed to be for you at that particular time. And that was probably one of the great skills that Luang Por Chah had. He said of himself that he wasn't really anybody. He said, if you are anybody, you're always going to suffer. Doesn't matter who you try to be. And so precisely because Luang Por was nobody, that he could be anybody. And of course, I'm just talking here because I certainly, as much as the two monks who spoke before me, never really got to live with Achaan Chah as he was still fit and healthy and able to teach. I arrived in Wat Pananachat at the time when Tanchen Pasano was the abbot, who was a direct disciple of Luang Por Chah, and who had the very love that you have heard other monks today speak about, that the monks would have for Luang Por Chah. And so he would try his best to really practice Luang Por Chah's teachings, and also being a teacher in his own right at that time, he used Luang Por Chah's methods to teach you. And so I learned via my teacher about all the things that perhaps Luang Por Sumeto and also Tanchanyana Dhamma will be able to speak out of first-hand experience. But for me, being in Wat Pananachat at that particular time was significant. It was just the right time. I needed to be there at that particular time. I already felt I was at the right time, at the right place. Everything seemed to be made to help me find my way. I was like a 20-year-old young kid. I was like a ball of clay that hadn't really taken shape yet, and I was ready to be netted into something, because at the time certainly I was still pretty much a mess. Just an adolescent who was not really sure of what he wanted to do with his life. So Luang Por Chah, of course, was sick at that time, but as Tan Siripanyo said before, we went every Uposatha day to pay respect to Luang Por Chah at his hospital kuti, where the monks would wheel him out in his wheelchair, paralyzed as he was, for us to do some chanting for him. This particular chanting that we did on that very day was recommended to us by a very highly attained meditation master, who said that Luang Por Chah would actually benefit from us chanting those chants for him. And so Champasno took that up, and so we went every week to do this chanting for 10 years, maybe even longer. And it was beautiful every day to go there, to be able to sit in front of Achaan Chah. And much like Achan Siripanyo's experience was my own when I first saw this body that was obviously paralyzed and no longer capable, seemingly, to teach. But again, there it was, the real teaching of the Dhamma, old age, sickness and death. However, I just like to relate to you a story, because I was fortunate enough, as many other monks, when Luang Por Chah was sick, to be able to nurse him. There was a time when every fortnight there was a group of monks who would go to be the ones who would nurse him at that particular time. So they would be living in the hospital kuti with Luang Por Chah, taking turns of being around him 24 hours a day. One of the most amazing things for those of you who are into medical care and nursing and know a little bit about it was, after 10 years of lying in bed, Luang Por Chah never had developed any bed sores. It goes to show the care, the loving care that went into looking after him 24 hours a day. The monks were around him 24 hours a day during those 10 years that he was ill before he finally passed away. And he was, when he needed to be in his body or with his body, he would be there when the monks did things like exercising him, or washing him, clothing him, taking him to the toilet, doing all the things that, as you know, a paralyzed body can no longer do. The functions have all ceased. There's nothing he could do by himself. He could not even sit up by himself. He would just lie there. He had to be turned, and everything had to be done for him. And then the monks would do that. And so I had just spent the most lovely 2 weeks upataking, looking after Luang Por Chah at a night shift, and it was just truly amazing. Sometimes you just sit there by his bedside at night, quietly meditating in the silence and the stillness of the night, just knowing that somehow Luang Por Chah's mind would probably be there, and whether you knew or you didn't know, but at least you perceived. Maybe you just wanted to perceive his presence, but it certainly was an amazing presence just to be around him, even at that state. But the story I wanted to tell you, because it is about a particular mental defilement that I'm sure all of you have to encounter from time to time, is the situation when we used to exercise Luang Por Chah. You must imagine he would lie on his back and the monks would massage or exercise his arms and his legs, giving massage. And it was about 4 monks doing that at the time. And it was always the duty of one monk to make sure that Luang Por Chah would not urinate into the bed, because obviously because he had no longer control over his bodily functions. Someone would have to take care of the fact that it was always be in a little bottle, and that had to be taken care of so that he wouldn't wet the bed, because then you'd have to take all the sheets off, you had to clean the whole place and start basically all over again. So I just had this lovely 2 weeks with some very mindful, lovely, beautiful monks, and I had asked for a second shift, which is another story I'd love to tell, but I won't have enough time. But I just was granted another 2 weeks shift, and so I was on this shift and we were exercising Luang Por, but the group of monks I was with, they weren't so mindful. They were actually, in my opinion, quite almost a bit sloppy. They chatted among themselves while we were doing the exercises, and they seemed to not really be paying the kind of attention that me in my kind of Western righteous mind would have wanted them to pay, because there was the Grand Master and we were looking after him, we were exercising him, and sure enough they would have to be respectful and not be chatting and not be forgetting themselves. So I was getting a bit upset there. However, after about a good 5 or 10 minutes, Luang Por Chah urinated into the bed. And I was really getting upset, because this monk obviously neglected his duty, he didn't do his job. So we had to clean the whole bed up, do the sheets new, start all over again. And again, they were chatting away. And for the second time, Luang Por urinated into the bed. And I was getting really angry by that time. But of course, Asian culture in Thailand, you're not supposed to show anger, because it's an unwholesome mind state. So I tried to contain my anger as best I could. And sure enough, cleaned the bed up, took another good 10 minutes, new white sheets, everything, started exercising, and you wouldn't believe it, for the third time, Luang Por Chah urinated into the bed. And I just blew a fuse. I was a young 3 or 4 Vasa monk who just could no longer control his anger. And I blasted this monk, actually Laotian monk, who was actually senior to me by at least 1 year. And it was just absolutely unheard of that, a prafarang like myself would get so angry and to the point of, becoming loud and screaming and yelling and actually blasting this monk. But what happened was even more unbelievable and something that I will never forget for the rest of my life, because as you know, Luang Por Chah was paralyzed and he was not supposed to be able to move any of his limbs, let alone sit up. But he was lying on his back at that time, and as I was blasting this monk, Luang Por Chah by himself sat up just from the lying position and started shaking. The whole body was shaking because he needed obviously to put a lot of effort into exercising control over the body to the extent that he could actually sit up. He went into these convulsions, and he sat up and he stared straight into my eyes with a look that I will never forget for the rest of my life. And I was just even saying it, my hair stands on end, and I start almost shivering because it was just an experience that was just awesome. And of course, he didn't say anything because he could no longer speak. But he didn't need to say anything either, because the message was absolutely clear and evident and plain there and then at that moment. It doesn't matter, and that was the message I got out of it for myself. It doesn't matter what anybody else does. You need to look after your own mind. It doesn't matter what other people do. You do not need to get angry over anything. So the message was, again, pointing back to our own minds. The need to develop our own hearts, to develop our own mind. That's where the Dhamma lies. The Dhamma is not found anywhere other than inside our own hearts. It's the liberation of the mind that the Buddha taught as the goal for 45 years. And so this experience for me was one of the highlights of my being around Luang Por Chah, and just the enormous delight and gratitude and appreciation of being able to nurse him, and just having to have the privilege of being able to do that was something that I really cherish. I really cherish the memories of those times I had where I was able to be close and around him. So Wat Pananachat in those days was a place where I came to decide. I didn't actually decide to ordain there, but the experience that made me finalize that decision took place there. Again, it's something that I would refer back to the teachings that I received and read and later on heard on tape from Luang Por Chah. I made that decision to become a monk in a situation where I was bathing at a well. In those days you had these clay urns where you took a dipper and just, used that for washing. Wasn't any showers in those days. And I was bathing all by myself in the forest there at one of these clay urns, and all of a sudden I started crying. And tears would run down my face, and at the same time I perceived this very profound inner sense of joy and happiness. And it was a seemingly totally schizophrenic situation. I mean, how can you be totally happy and at the same time cry? Because it wasn't tears of joy, it was actually tears of sadness. And yet I was very, very happy, very, very joyful. And it was only in retrospect that I realized what was actually going on there, because I realized I had finally found a path that would make sense, because from the very moment I came and started reading Luang Por Chah's teaching, and because they were the teachings that got me into the Dhamma, there weren't any scriptures. I mean, there wasn't even a complete Tripitaka set in Wat Pananachat at the time. So the teachings there were the teachings of the forest teachers, and obviously Luang Por Chah. So for me the decision there was clear, because I was crying because I knew I would have to leave behind a lot of familiar things. I'd have to leave behind my parents, my friends and relatives, my country, and that made me sad, because I knew I probably wouldn't see them for a long time. And indeed, after I made that decision, I never went back to Germany for over 7 years. But at the same time, I was so happy because I found something that really made sense, a teaching that really seemed to lead to liberation. That was always pointing back at the one thing that is worthwhile not only cultivating and developing, but also worthy of liberating, and that's the mind. To me, the path always made a lot more sense by in looking at it in the sense that there is something there in this mass of suffering that is worthy of liberation, that is worth liberating. To me, that was always something that inspired me. And so that's why the teachings that would always point back to the mind and ultimate liberation of the mind would always be the teachings that I found the most useful. What I actually thought of doing today, and I was sort of shifting back and forth because I didn't know which way to go, and I didn't really want to prepare anything. But what I did bring, not so much as a backup in case I run out of things to say, but it's something that I've done a while ago, and now I'm actually thinking it might be a nice thing to do, because what I've done a while back is, having just said in the beginning how everybody has their own Achaan Chah, so I kind of collected my own Achaan Chah, or better to say I collected the teachings, or I collected the things that inspired me about Achaan Chah. So some of it is biographical, in the sense that it's like how he started out to practice, and it's about the early years. Some of it is experiences in his own meditation, some is to do with teaching, some is to do with his own liberation of mind, and some of the more profound teachings. So I kind of gathered those aspects and teachings that really sort of reached and touched my heart, and I did something perhaps a little bit cheeky, because it's not usually done, but I've actually translated them into verse. I mean, they're obviously prose teachings, but I translated them into verse, because for me, verse, which has a great place in the suttas as well, and there was a lot of verses in the teachings of the Buddha and his disciples, and in fact many of the Kru Bhajan today have uttered great verses, lovely poems. Most famous one, obviously, Luang Por Man's Ballad of the Liberation from the Khandas. And but I realized, just reading through the teachings and gathering them, there was so much in there that would lend itself to be put into prose, because into verse, because verse, it commits itself to memory so much easier, and it flows very nicely. And so what I'd like to do with just the remaining time I have is just to read out to you those verses that I composed of some of the teachings that really touched my heart of Luang Por Chah, and hope that perhaps I have a few more minutes after that to just pick up one or two of those aspects that I think might be relevant for your own practice. So these are my translations, I must say, of Luang Por Chah, and I try to be obviously as accurate as I could, but as verse being verse, that might not always be so easy. I turned to Dhamma, seeking knowledge, yearning for the truth. Why is this wretched and deluded world so miserable? This lifetime I give up, both mind and body I resolved, and I shall follow to the letter what the Buddha taught, intent on reaching understanding in this very life, because in case I won't, I'll still be sunk in suffering. I'll treat my life as though it were a single night and day. There's nothing in this world I won't renounce or give away. No matter how much hardship I'll endure and persevere, since otherwise I'll just keep doubting, things will have no end. When I look back upon the days when practicing alone among the forests in the hills on lonely mountain peaks, I see the pains and tribulations that were most extreme, and yet while fraught with hardship, they would give me so much joy. The pain and joy went hand in hand like eating pega leaves when grilled and dipped in ground-up ginger mixed with chili sauce. Although the taste is most delicious, it's extremely hot. It's tasty though the snot is running, groaning you can't stop. That's how I recollect the practice of the early days. What is of great importance when we're practicing at first is physical seclusion, and to see it as the cause providing the occasion for seclusion of the mind, which will in turn, as taught by Sariputta Thera once, give rise to the seclusion from defilements in the heart. When in seclusion, you will practice, thus you'll see the truth. A teacher, though, can give advice where you've been going wrong. In fact, it is the places where you really think you're right, where wrongly understanding things contaminates your thoughts. The forest masters taught the way for rooting out conceit, wrong view, and self-delusion and defilements from the heart. You're dealing with the flesh and blood of these kilesas here. However hard it seems, don't disregard their practices, the fundamentals that our teachers handed down to us. If you keep walking in the footsteps of these noble ones, like Luang Por Sao and Luang Por Man and Luang Por Thongrat too, or Chao Khun Bodhinyana, then the path you're following is most direct, for they have realized Dhamma for themselves. Applying Dhamma, bringing it to bear, you must be tough. It's grave, not light, no airy thing. You've got to give your life. If tigers eat you or some elephant should trample you, so be it. Having kept your precepts pure, you are at ease. There's nothing more to worry. It's as though already dead. In case of death, what should you fear when nothing's left to die? This single weapon of the Dhamma brought me victory on mountain tops across the country, triumphing alone. When letting go becomes complete, you dare to give your life. I thought and saw the Buddha's weapon strengthening the mind. Among the weapons in the world, the Dhamma reigned supreme. I kept reflecting, looking, seeing, knowing for myself. The mind, when seeing, penetrates completely into things. While that's the truth of suffering, cessation is like this. And so contentment does arise, the mind is set at ease. But those who look at suffering, not penetrating it, contented with the peace and calm they feel from time to time, have really got no way to know this truth within themselves. Those unafraid of death won't die who gladly give their lives. Let suffering transcend itself and reach its final end, thus comprehend the truth and see the truth, the nature of all things. For truly that has worth and value, leading to a mind indomitable, valiant, staunch, unshaken, come what may. Of people, creatures, or the jungle, it will know no fear. All this is application of the mind that's well sustained. You raise a point and then sustain it to investigate. Vitakka and vichara thus will work in unison. You penetrate the matter until piti floods the mind. My hair would stand on end reflecting, walking chankama, or I would bring to mind the virtues of the triple gem, and rapture would pervade the body, thus refreshing it. I'd sit there while the mind welled up to overflow with joy, recalling what I did to rise above all obstacles. The tears would start to fall, and I felt ever more inclined to struggle on with inspiration and to persevere without the question of discouragement at any time. There was initial application of the mind, and then there was the application of the mind that was sustained, and there were joy and happiness with wisdom that was based on application of the mind and on that happiness which was so solidly established and was anchored well. Now you could say it was dependent on the energy or strength of jhana at that moment if you're so inclined. It's as it was, but if you want to name it, go ahead. Before too long, vitakka and vichara were renounced. Then piti sukha was abandoned, leaving just the mind, one-pointed, firmly gathered in samadhi, well sustained, and thus the peace that is the bedrock that yields wisdom was attained. I had the insight that through practice we will know and see. To study and to think about it is a different thing, as all assumptions guessing at the way things ought to be turn out to be in contrast to the way they really are. So now I was content, no matter whether fat or thin, while fit and healthy or while sick and weak, I was content. I never wondered where my mother was, nor did I think of family or friends, but in my mind I just resolved, if I should die, I die. That's it, and that was all there was. I had no worries left, and there was no more holding back. The mind was firm, invigorated, and it pushed me on. You'll have to practice, lest your hesitations never end. However much you study Dhamma, all the talks you hear, the knowledge that you gain from that won't take you quite as far as will the truth itself, and thus you're never freed from doubt. But if your knowledge is a realization of the truth, then things will reach completion, they'll be coming to an end. I don't know how you'd put it, it just happens naturally. The mind that's genuine arises ineluctably. When all phenomena are merely viewed as elements, the mind won't be deluded by whatever object known. It can't be shaken, it will not encounter suffering. Conventional realities, when known for what they are, give way to ultimate reality. The truth is seen. Not understanding where the difference lies between the mind and all the states of mind that will arise and pass away, we take those states for real, as if they were the mind itself. As soon as Luang Por Man had clarified this point for me, I realized if we see this, we can stop and put things down. The mind that's pure is neither happiness nor suffering, no vedana is felt at all within its purity. Unsullied thus, it's independent, clear and radiant. If you can understand this point, there's not a lot to do. Although we use the world's conventions to communicate, deep down we must be empty, for the mind's above these things. We take to freedom the abiding of the noble ones. To free ourselves from Mara's trap, we have to watch the mind, while that which knows will do the watching as we're keeping guard. We'll see the objects taken up and clung to by the mind as valueless and by their nature undesirable. The moment thoughts are known and seen for what they truly are, the mind will stop proliferating and transcend them all. When in the stillness of samadhi you attend to sounds, I realized you can hear them, but while staying with the mind, within its emptiness, it's quiet and no sound occurs. When it arises into consciousness and you're alert, you see the separateness between the knowing and the sound. The object and the mind are not combined, but quite distinct. There's no connection here between the two phenomena. Reflecting thus, I realized the importance of this point. The continuity of things, when broken, leads to peace. Where continuity of things prevailed, now peace emerged. The boost of energy aroused by the experience inspired me to make an all-out effort practicing. When later on I stopped to meditate so formally, the mind continued with its meditation as before, and still as calm and peaceful as I was, I went to rest. About to touch the pillow with my head as I lay down, the mind began inclining inwards, moving deep inside. I didn't know where to, but it just kept on moving in. As if a current sent along a cable hit a switch, the body shattered and exploded from the inside out. The sound was deafening while the awareness in the mind was at that moment crystal clear and at its most refined. Beyond a point it seemed as though the mind had been cut loose and moved towards its deepest and most quiet spot inside. It settled there within a realm of utter emptiness, which nothing from outside could penetrate, where nothing reached. And having stayed there for some time, the mind withdrew. I don't mean that I made the mind withdraw. I merely watched, just witnessing the mind returning to its normal state. What happened was the question that arose. The answer came. There is no need to doubt such natural phenomena. According to conditions, they arise and pass away. Reflecting thus, the mind accepted it and paused a while, inclining inward once again without me doing it, and deep inside it came upon that switch it hit before. Again the body shattered into tiny particles. Cut loose once more, the mind slipped into silence deep within, a state of peace and calm still more profound, where nothing reached. And following its own momentum, having stayed some time, without me doing or directing it, the mind withdrew. While simply staying with the knowing, I just watched it all. With no more doubt arising, I went on to contemplate, and for the third time very soon the mind inclined within, when I experienced the world completely vanishing, as this whole planet turned into the element of space. Continuing to dwell within until its time was up, and staying longer on this third occasion than before, the mind withdrew, returning to its normal state once more. What I have related here concerns the mind that's genuine, how its reality can truly be experienced. You need both confidence in Dhamma and sincerity to keep on deepening the practice. Be prepared to die. The time will come when this whole world turns upside down, inverting both your view and understanding of the truth. If people see you at the time, they'll likely think you're mad. For after such experiences, nothing is the same. It will transform the way you view the people in the world, but you are the only one who will have seen things in this way. Your whole perception of reality is changed around. The way you think about the world is altered drastically. When other people talk like this, you will talk in other ways. When other people walk up one way, you will walk down here. You're not the same as other human beings anymore. From then you'll often gain these states, and they will last for long. The mind is at its boldest here, most firm and confident. Its energy and power go beyond what you'd expect. This is the power of samadhi when it's at its peak. It is the power still derived from samatha alone, but as a basis for developing vipassana, it will enable you to contemplate proficiently. Samadhi is the resting place of all practitioners. It was the Buddha's base from which to contemplate the truth. The thing then that was crucial was to clearly understand and to refine the practice down within the mind itself. When looking at my body or at someone else's form, and there arose attraction, I would seek to find the cause. I'd contemplate the body, break it down into its parts. I'd look at head hair, body hair, nails and teeth and skin. The Buddha taught to contemplate the body frequently, dissect it, peel the skin off and incinerate it all. Keep meditating thus until the mind is firm and still. Unwavering within the meditation on the foul, you walk for alms and see but corpses tottering along. And making effort practicing like this, you bring the mind to deeply contemplate and see the body's transience. So when you see a pretty woman and you feel her pull, You bring to mind the image of a decomposing corpse, decaying, rotting, oozing matter, livid, putrefied. You contemplate like this on each occasion, thus the mind maintains a distance and it won't get lost in the allure. Because the truth is clearly seen, no longer do you doubt the nature of the body being to decay and rot. Make every effort that you can, reflecting till the foul becomes a clear perception firmly rooted in the mind, where seeing anyone is like you're looking at a corpse. You see a man, a woman, or yourself, and you see a corpse. Thus everybody in the end becomes a rotting corpse. It's quite enjoyable, if only you get down to it. So train yourself until it's second nature to the mind. Emerging from samadhi, sometimes images appear, depicting aspects of the body's unattractiveness. Their nature will be vivid, clear, and unmistakable, though genuinely deep samadhi needs to pave their way. Such images provide the ground for insight to unveil the body's foul, repugnant, and objectionable traits, unmasking its impermanence and utter lack of self. You have to bring this kind of vision right inside your heart, till inside knowledge is developed automatically. Originating from within a state of perfect peace, the striking impact of such insight makes the mind stand still. And having seen the body in the way it truly is, a sense of weariness eschewing makes it turn away. Persistently investigating thus will keep reject and ultimately smash the view of personality. It makes an end of all the doubts that may as yet remain about the body, as we call this heap of flesh we bear, and of all the blind adherence to our practices. In case of illness or disease, no matter how severe, samadhi will be firm and wisdom imperturbable. Your understanding will allow you to discriminate between the mind and body as distinct phenomena. The separateness between the two as indisputable implies the body's nature has been seen with clarity. It is the first embarking on the Noble Eightfold Path, the first clear insight into ultimate reality. The noble truths are seen and merge as factors of the path. There is this balanced way of practice where you contemplate whatever you experience, whatever things arise. Some people think that when their formal meditation ends, they can relax and put their meditation object down. Don't be like that. Don't let the work of meditation lapse. Important, unimportant, good and bad, or rich or poor, the young and old, the large and small, as well as black and white, you just observe and keep investigating all the things which are the causes and conditions acting on the mind. When there is thinking going on, then simply know these thoughts and notice how in actuality that's all they are. Thus all phenomena and all impressions in the mind are lumped together as anicca, dukkha, anatta. You neither take them up, nor do you hold or cling to them. This is the graveyard for the varied objects of the mind. You throw them into these three pits, abiding by their truth, and see them all as equal in the way they really are, as merely Dhamma that arises into consciousness. To practice with the present moment means to deal at once with each phenomenon as it arises in the mind, investigating there and then the moment it occurs. Since Paccuppanna Dhamma points to what is here and now, it's rooted in the process, spanning causes and effects, encompassing with one accord both cause and end result. The causes of the past come to fruition here and now, and their effects are forming causes for results to come. Thus past and present and the future can be seen as one. The Buddha called it Eko Dhammo, Dhamma unity. It's not a lot of different things, it's really just this much. You see the present, thus you're seeing what the future holds. You understand the present, thus you understand the past. The past, the present, and the future form a solid chain where causes and effects succeed each other constantly. Both past and future link together in the here and now. Abiding in the present moment, you abandon both, the past and future, That's the causes and their due results. In fixing mindfulness and wisdom at this halfway point, you'll see a constant process of the rise and fall in all, where things arise and cease, just to arise and cease again. All that is subject to arising is impermanent. Arising in the present moment, it will have to cease. This is the easiest, least complex way to contemplate, reflecting on the transience of things arising now. Investigating what's uncertain and impermanent will bring you insight into what is permanent and true. For you to really savor peace, you have to bring the mind to where it's firmly centered in the present moment, now. Whatever happiness and suffering arises here, you teach yourself repeatedly that that's impermanent. The mind recalling joy and misery as transient implies the wisdom of the Buddha veiled in all of us. And that which recognizes the uncertainty in all denotes the Dhamma of the Buddha latent in the heart. The Buddha and the Dhamma thus are equal, they are one. When transience is known and seen in all conditioned things, all problems due to taking up what's truly valueless will cease, and rather than remaining stuck, the mind lets go. The problems caused, the taking up and holding on to things, will vanish through this thorough penetration of the truth, which culminates in mind and Dhamma merging into one. Whatever way you look at it, this is the only thing that's really certain. Transience is the intrinsic truth. There's nothing more profound to realize, nothing else to seek. All teachings in the world can be contained within the one, concerning the impermanence of all phenomena. I've searched for over 40 years, and this is all I found: anicca, that, and patience, and the power to endure. My practice from the early days, right up until today, was to rely upon this Dhamma of impermanence. Quite frankly, it's a matter where you need to finish off. You're taking up the practice and you see it to the end. You have to see appearances and know where freedom lies. When practice is consistent and your contemplation keen, eventually you reach the point where you are pushing on. You hurry forward, hurry back, you're hurrying to stop. You keep on practicing like this until the point is reached where going forward is not it, yet there is no way back, nor is there any way to stop. It's finished, that's the end. Don't look for anything beyond this point, the task is done. Kinasavo, in whom the outflows of the mind have ceased, he won't go forward, won't retreat, and yet he doesn't stop. No stopping, no more coming, no more going. It's complete. That's where you realize emptiness. There's nothing here at all.
So this year Luang Por is visiting Malaysia along with a group of other monks. The idea arose to have a day-long event to commemorate Luang Por life and his teachings, and to invite other teachers, other senior monks who trained with Luang Por, as well as the newer generation we call disciples of Luang Por, although many of us never actually lived with him or trained with him or received instructions directly. But because it's a living tradition, and one which instruction is given orally, and also one in which instruction is given by example and through living in close community, we still feel a very strong connection with our teacher. Luang Por means Venerable Father, and so the 16th of January in Kuala Lumpur, in Sentul, is going to be an occasion for many of us to share not so much our direct experience with Luang Por, but why the influence of this very small man physically is so great and widespread all around the world, and even to this day able to inspire new generations of spiritual seekers.
Well, I'm very impressed with this whole event. These days in the world, it's just so rare to have an inspiring occasion, something which is on the level of a rock concert, but a whole lot more wholesome. The people who organized this event from the very beginning had such a wonderful, good intention. I think the good karma that's going to come from that will just be tremendous for them. And the fact that we can get together so many Sangha members, monks and nuns from so many different traditions here, all together, dwelling in harmony, coming together in harmony, listening to the Dhamma in harmony, paying homage to the Triple Gem and to our teachers in harmony. This is really a rare and special occasion. Achaan Chah is mind-boggling, really, how much he has been able to coalesce people's wholesome intentions from around the world. The fact that one simple man from the countryside in northeast Thailand has been able to draw people together from all different cultures around the world, not just in his lifetime, but also after he's passed away, is just phenomenal. And to have the opportunity to come together and to pay homage to him out of a deep respect for his practice, a deep respect for his liberation, it's a great honor to be able to be part of that. So I'd like to share any of the merits that have come from this wonderful event here in Kuala Lumpur today and this evening, to all the people who went through all the difficulty of organizing it, and all the wonderful volunteers, and all of the wonderful Sangha members who have participated, and most importantly, in memory of Ajahn Chah, may all beings be freed from suffering.
I'm very happy to be here, and I had no way of knowing what the situation would be like when I first was asked to take part in this event. And certainly it's turned out to be most impressive, with all the people here that have such enormous interest in the Thai forest tradition, or in the forest tradition in general, of which Achaan Chah, as we know, was one of the most outstanding teachers, whose life has touched and reached so many to this day all around the world. And so, having now been invited to take part in this, I'd just like to really express my appreciation for the organizers who have done such a lovely job in doing this.